Welcome to the No Limit, No Boundaries UFO podcast. Veteran UFO investigators Dan Spell and Mike Pinicello take on all aspects of the UFO phenomena with insight and honesty. It's all fair game here. No limits, no boundaries. And now, here are your hosts, Dan and Mike.
Welcome, everyone, to UFO Fact or Fiction. Tonight, my colleague Mike and I are going to talk about something that doesn't necessarily involve fact or fiction. We're gonna go off track a little bit. We're going to talk about UFOs, ufology, and the paranormal. Of course, we got to say that the opinions on our show are those of Mike and Dan, and they are not necessarily those of the MUFON organization. So, Mike, welcome. Good to talk to you. Good to see you again, buddy.
It's good to see you too. It's been too long.
Yes, it has. We need to get these shows on more often.
Yeah, I agree. But I thought this is a great topic, this paranormal and the science, because it's the way, right or wrong, and we'll talk about this tonight, that ufology is moving to. It's blending the two together. And I think it's important that we stop and pause and try and, what do you think, come to a consensus on it, or come to
it may be one of those topics, Mike, that you and I may agree on it, but I'm not sure that the community as a whole will ever agree on it, because it's so subjective. But
it is.
I think there's some anxiety in the UFO community about the conflation of some paranormal things with UFOs, UAPs. And that's what we're going to talk about now. On the screen there, Mike, is the two columns highlighted in yellow. Science-based investigations of UFOs and UAPs. Far right column are a variety of categories of the paranormal. Of course, as everybody knows now, it's been advertised heavily, the military has been picking up a lot of activity of UAPs, UFOs. And on the left column, you can see that some of the things that are being used: sensors, airborne, space, and even undersea. Videos are being taken. There are some of the things here that have not yet been proven, such as metamaterials. There are reports, and I believe Lou Elizondo has hinted at metamaterials being evaluated by the U.S. government. Is that did I hear him correctly?
That is correct. Because so my understanding of the provenance of that is that the organization TTSA, To the Stars Academy, attained that material from Linda Moulton Howe, I think, if I'm not mistaken, from another UFO, and they are then working with the Army Research Lab to evaluate that material. But to my knowledge, I don't think anything has been made public yet. And I may be mistaken on that. I know, listening to another podcaster talk about this very topic, his research came up with that the Army said that they were delayed due to COVID. However, things are starting to move back to normal, and maybe it's stuck in the pipeline. Maybe they have other projects ahead of it. But I guess my question to you is, if this is truly something extraterrestrial, wouldn't that go right to the top of the list? I mean, the potential applications for something extraterrestrial.
You mean the metamaterials would be a high priority?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you would think so.
Who's to say that it isn't? And we're just not told about it.
True. Very true.
there are some pretty terrific labs that the government and industry and academia have. They may well be putting a lot of effort into it. And that's assuming that there are such metamaterials, because no one has ever verified that. As far as I know, no one has ever said, yes, the US government has them, or Lockheed Martin has them, or General
Or
Dynamics.
Bell Labs, because
Yeah.
supposedly my understanding is, and like I said, not verified, they were the ones that got the material from the Roswell crash.
Right, right. And I believe Colonel Corso wrote that in his book, didn't he?
He did.
He wrote about that, and was his book The Day After Roswell, I believe.
Yes, yes. But I think, and it's been a while since I've read Tom Carney and Don Schmidt's books, but I would say that they reference that as well, at least not in the Roswell book, but the one they wrote on Wright-Patterson. I think that they also referenced, and again, I could be wrong,
Right.
that it went to Bell Labs. But the other thing, I'm looking at your list here, and I guess maybe before we dive into these two lists, because they're very, very good lists that you have here, and I'm curious of what your thoughts are as to why ufology is now moving towards the paranormal. I mean, I have my thoughts, and I can share those later if you want to hear them, but I'm curious about your thoughts, because as a UFO investigator, you approach it as a scientific focus. You want the evidence, right, to prove it. And for so long in the field, that has been the dominant position of researchers, is give me the documents. For investigators, it's show me the evidence. But it's like, in your opinion, why do you think in the last, I don't know, 5 years, it's slowly started to move into the paranormal, but now it's accelerating? And I'm curious of what your thoughts are as to why that is.
I think probably a big part of that is the media.
Okay.
There's a plethora of shows, books, articles written about that very topic. And people who are interested in ufology and wanting to know what's going on are diving into that material. And there are people who write those books, who make those shows, have an interest in propagating these theories. Because if you look at UFO, if we did nothing else but that far left column, to a lot of people that can be pretty daunting, pretty boring. Science and math and engineering is tough stuff. But then when you look over at the right column, Mike, you're talking about things, people who aren't engineers, scientists, the other half of their brain is the one that's working hard. And I think they're probably able to absorb that easier, perhaps. So that's part of it, the influence of the media on people. And then there are people who have come forward who claim to have seen a UFO, but not long after that, they're having paranormal activity. And I think we've heard that from people who have worked out at the Skinwalker Ranch. They did their scientific research out there. They went home, and some of them have had poltergeist activity. Is it related? Who knows? But that's what some people have claimed. The problem there is, though, Mike, as an investigator, how do you prove that?
Right.
All you can do is go on the credibility of the person telling you that.
Right. And you would think that like, I don't know about you, but I can speak for myself. If because I read the book you're talking about, and they do mention several times looking out their back window and seeing
Mhm.
like a wolf-like creature
Yes.
just standing there. I'll be honest with you. First thing I would have done as an investigator is order some cameras from Amazon,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
maybe they did, but you, you know, you're right. It is probably something that more people can relate to when it comes to the paranormal, and these topics you have under them than say the science, which it's much more black and white, cut and dry, and very left brain thinking.
Right.
And I
And
also think though
let's
that
be honest, some of the engineering, the science, and the math can be pretty boring to people.
yes,
You
it
know,
can be,
sure.
and it won't provide you the evidence that you're looking for
Not
because
yet. Not yet.
not yet. But I think people are. I think the reason is because there is so much evidence for the paranormal, and like we talked off camera, you can go into a haunted house, and if a chair is thrown at you, you're pretty sure that it's haunted if no one else is there. You can't really do that with ufology, and you can say, well, there is a lot of photographs of UFOs in the sky, but as you would probably also attest to, a lot of those photographs are not very good photographs,
Right.
and you can't say, yeah, that's a UFO craft, that's a extraterrestrial ship. It
Right.
doesn't look like anything. It looks like a ball of light, which you can say, oh, that's just a spirit.
Yeah.
And in the same respect with the paranormal, like again, going to the media, as you were saying, um, so often they'll show infrared videos of rooms and they'll say, oh, see that orb, that's an orb. And the investigators say, no, that's dust that's just close to the lens. And so
Right.
you can extrapolate a lot more with the paranormal and satisfy your answers, your curiosity by that. So it provides the answers that the science won't. And I think you're right though, that does do a disservice to the field. I don't know, because it it blurs the lines too much, in my opinion.
It does. And as you and I talked about offline, if during the congressional hearing 2 weeks ago, or whenever it was, if those government officials started talking about things other than UAPs and started melding in poltergeists, uh, reincarnation, men in black, that wouldn't fly with the bulk of the American public. It just wouldn't. I
No.
think the American public can get their hands around objects, that are outpacing our aircraft. That they can grasp. But things that they like that, I think it's hard for most people to understand unless they're really well read into these topics like you and I are.
Mhm.
It wouldn't have flown. The media would have had a field day, and the American people would not have been happy with it.
And it throws a little bit of a monkey wrench in it. I'm looking at your paranormal field, like remote viewing, telekinesis, clairvoyance, and mediums. The military, well, the government, CIA, the alphabet soup agencies, they spent a lot of money researching this
Exactly, and
for
that's why I
decades.
highlighted that one in red.
Well,
That one
all
had
three of them.
they did apply scientific methods to that.
Yeah, and that uh, a skeptic or not a skeptic, someone who would defend this blurring of the two fields would say, well, see, it is scientific, but
Mhm. Yes,
uh, I don't know. I
but
agree with you on that.
the pressure
And
is being put on us, Mike, to focus more on the scientific investigations and to not to stop including the paranormal in our investigations when it's involved. But our community of investigators now has to come to grips with how do you balance the two. That's a tough one. Because someone I got an email from someone who said, well, UFOs by their nature are paranormal. They're outside the norm of what we know right now. But I think we can all agree that they are in fact objects. They're physical, most of them. They're real. And they have propulsion, they have navigation, they have all of that. But things like Dogman and Bigfoot and the Mothman, great stories, incredibly interesting, but have never been proven.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of anecdotal stories of them, but no proof yet.
Yeah.
Same thing with the men and women, now women in black. A lot of anecdotes, but no one has ever brought one forward and proven it.
Well, it's the same with the black-eyed children. I mean,
yes,
it's the rumor of those started in the 90s. There is lore that they go back even further, and there are some books that talk about now they're reported throughout history. However, when you read the book and you read the source that they're saying, oh, that's a black-eyed child, it's really up to the reader and the author subjectivity. Like, it's their opinion. There's nothing definitive when you read the text that says, yes, this is a black-eyed child.
Right.
It could be anything. And so you're right. That is, there is nothing definitive even with that. And that's only in the 90s. That's probably, maybe you know of something earlier, but I think that's the most recent paranormal UFO switchover. Unless you want to say the hybrids that are
yeah, I think the hybrid maybe. But for people who don't know, right, Mike, the black-eyed children supposedly show up at people's homes. They knock on the door, ring the doorbell, and try to talk their way into your house. And the legend or the lore is if you let them in, bad things happen. Is that sum it up in a nutshell?
Yeah, that is. And in fact, there's the black-eyed children have a lot of similarities to vampires. They're often seen at night. They have to be let in, which is the same with the vampires. When they are let in and they do attack people, it does seem like they're like taking their soul, taking their energy.
Yeah.
Whereas vampires take your blood. But in ancient times, the soul was part and parcel with blood. So it's just a more modern translation of it. So again, it links that mythology of it has vampire-like characteristics to a child, that there is no physical evidence that these exist. Right. And even with the stories I've read of these child going to houses that have cameras, they are not seen on the camera.
Wow.
So, again, how do you prove that?
As of today, you cannot. You can't prove it.
So here's a question for you, and you brought it up before about like standards for investigation. There's a lot of organizations out there that are investigating UFOs, and then you pick up the individuals that are investigating UFOs on their own. You would almost wish that there was, in academia, there's accrediting bodies, there's rules to govern how we investigate, or
Right.
how a particular science or discipline does something. And for me, the biggest frustration I have is that ufologists want to be taken serious, and yet they do nothing to try and bring some kind of universal standard to the field. And this topic that you brought up tonight, the science versus the paranormal, is a perfect example that some kind of governing body, a larger overarching one, I'm not saying any individual UFO field, but in the way that the sciences have a discipline that is governed by a set of rules, is something that we really need. And I think it's the only way we're ever going to move forward as a legitimate field. And I think this podcast is a good start to it, because we're seeing that this creates a tremendous amount of ambiguity in what we come to investigate and conclusions we make based off of those investigations.
Well, I think MUFON at least provides us a pretty good foundation for investigation. The only exception is it doesn't really tell us how to handle these paranormal topics when they are allegedly involved with UFO sightings. There's no, except the ERT, we have that. They delve into this type of thing a little bit, where witnesses and experiencers have encountered what they believe extraterrestrial entities or non-human entities. There are procedures for that.
No, you're absolutely right. MUFON does a great job, and their mission and their statement and their methodology is on their website, which is anyone can read and emulate if they want. It's
Sure.
on their website, so there is a good starting point. I guess we'll have to see how that progresses within that organization in order to see how it affects the organization as the overall UFO field.
It's an example, Mike, of the science part.
Sure.
Saturday, our MUFON Maryland chapter had a guest speaker, Terry Lovelace. Terry says that when he was in his early 20s, he and a buddy who was also in the Air Force with him went camping in Devil's Den State Park. And while they were there, they encountered a very large triangular shaped object. And according to Terry, they were taken aboard this craft. And then they were released later, hours later. But one of the things that, and this is a physical evidence part right here, physical effects, both of those individuals had severe burns. Terry described it as severe sunburns over most of their body, including the bottom of their feet. Now, that may well have been some type of radiation burns. But that's the type of scientific, there's physical evidence there that an investigator can handle in a case like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good example of a physical effect on a witness, on an experiencer.
Right. Whereas the opposite to that would be if you were to do a lecture or run into someone who tells you about an encounter they have with an extraterrestrial being at night in their own privacy of their own house or in their sleep. It's a story, it's a very good story, but how do you provide some kind of evidence to support that? You could say witness credibility, but see
Right.
here, that's the problem with witness credibility. You have to look at the whole witness, and that kind of falls into your middle column. And, do they have anything that affects them? Do they have any kind of illness, or are they just flat out hoaxing us? Um, it's
Well,
not really a way to investigate a case, because
right.
and then they get defensive because they feel like you're attacking them, which you're not. You're just trying to find the truth.
And very often the results of the investigation does not fit into what they either want to have or what they really experience. Some of them probably really did have experiences. Others, or maybe they're lonely. They just want to, any number of reasons. The human psyche is incredible for things that it does. And we get people like that in our cases.
Yeah. And then you have the flip side. You could say, well, yes, you only have the witness, but you can get data points and you can see patterns with witnesses,
Right.
similar to like what's a lot of researchers have done. When they look at abductions, they interview thousands of abductees and they see what the common patterns are. Whereas they would say, they being the one playing the devil's advocate to our argument here, would say, well, you have the Institute for Discovery Science, ATIP, OSAP, crash retrievals, nukes and facilities where, yeah, there's probably scientific information from these programs or organizations that run them, like the nuclear facilities would be the Air Force, or crash retrieval would be the Air Force or Navy or Army in the earlier days.
Right.
But they're not sharing anything. So it's great that they have science somewhere, but you're not getting any information. OSAP was run by Bigelow Aerospace Company.
Right.
They're a private company. They don't have to disclose. NEDS, same thing. ATIP, well, it was government funded, but as we both know, there's not a lot out there of what they actually did. So you can play devil's advocate, where science is great if you get the information, but a lot of these organizations aren't sharing the information.
You
So
just made an excellent point, Mike. And if I could just follow up on that, when we know that evidence is there, the military has it, the government has it, we're almost certain of that, almost. But when there's a void there, an information void that the public wants filled, what's going to happen? That void is going to be filled by the things on the right. Well, we don't have an explanation for it from the government in terms of physical evidence. They're not telling us, so it's got to be from this column on the right, from the paranormal. It's going to fill that void, that need for information by the public.
Yeah. And
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I believe that's part of it. People want answers.
Yes.
We all do. We don't like questions that are unanswered. So we look elsewhere. Well, the government's not going to share the meta materials. They're not going to give us the really good photographs of the UFOs. So we're going to look elsewhere to fill that void. In some cases.
No, you're right. When nature abhors a vacuum, and the powers that be are creating an artificial vacuum, and the paranormal fills it in. You can play the conspiracy theory and say they do this on purpose because it muddies the whole field. And if there is a grain of truth that's out there, well, the field's already been so discredited in so many ways that, yeah, you can leave the truth out there and it could just be brushed aside as unverified information.
Sure.
By those crazy guys and girls with the tinfoil hats on their heads. So maybe that's off topic, I know, but I couldn't help but go there. It was there.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I think there's something to that. That void is being filled. And there are a lot of people eager to fill it. via
And like
books.
you were saying, money talks. I
It
mean,
does.
our field, because it's such a fringe science, it's not like you can if you make a living off it, it's not like you can get a grant or you work for a university. Some
Right.
retired people do, but for the most part, you have your bread and butter from this. Like you were saying off camera earlier, you follow the money. There's a monetary reason why these
Right.
stories continue and why they're moved forward in the narrative,
Right.
because it benefits people.
And if you're one of those people making money off of this topic, do you want the real answer? No, you don't. You want that uncertainty to continue, that vacuum. You don't want that filled, because that's your moneymaker. You don't
Right.
want it solved. You want it to be a perpetual mystery. Not all of them. There are very credible people out there in the field, but some are in it for the money, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. On the larger scale,
Mhm.
if you just look at social media around ufology, the two are combining more and more, faster and faster. Um, so I don't really know how that. And you could also make the argument, and I think some do, is that what's linking the paranormal, it's not so much the paranormal in that it's extra. I think what people are getting confused on is they don't understand the science. As physics starts to come out now with like multi-universes,
Mhm.
parallel universes, um, multi-dimensional object timelines, all of the modern stuff in physics that are now seeping out into the mainstream media. The regular people who are not physicists, they don't really understand what that means, and they just hear, oh, multidimensional, the object comes and goes. Sounds very paranormal to me. Maybe that's a ghost. And so I think that science, though it's good, has also created some of this on their own,
Mhm.
because people don't understand the science. They don't understand what a multiverse is. They don't understand what multidimensional is, or multiple timelines or alternate timelines.
Right.
It's
But even in those,
it's
Mike, yeah,
mhm.
they are, quote, paranormal, unquote, but there's also science behind it. If there
Well, there
is in
is.
fact multiple dimensions, there's science involved with that.
Well, right.
It
But
doesn't just
what I think
happen without.
no, but what I think is I'm trying to say is that yes, science is there, but science is feeding into the paranormal, because the layperson, the average person who's not an academic, who's not a physicist, who doesn't read physics journals, that understands the science,
Mhm.
they understand it in the paranormal realm.
Right,
So,
that's correct.
and we kind of talked about this before with like Skinwalker, the Skinwalker Ranch. If you are looking into them, the science will probably show that there's some kind of portal there, that maybe like a wormhole or something
Mhm.
um, that has multi-dimensional characteristics, whatever that is, and that is connecting different worlds. Well, science can explain that, but people are not seeing that. They're seeing the cryptodes, um, the weird poltergeist activity,
Yeah,
the shadow people, all the weird stuff. And it could be something as simple as the crypto. If it is a like, we don't really understand where wormholes go. They go into another universe. That's the hypothesis, but we're not really sure. Um, Maybe that's a being from another world just coming in. It could be like, if you or I walked into, if we saw a portal and we walked in, we look like crypto to some other civilization.
right.
I mean, I'm taking that to the extreme, but my
Right.
point is that science, people don't understand the science behind it yet. So they're filling that void with the paranormal to explain what they don't understand. Kind of what we've been saying all night. But in that
Yeah.
respect, science is kind of feeding the paranormal a little bit.
So my question, and this is perhaps off on a tangent, Mike, my question to you is, if things like those portals that entities can pass through from one dimension into another, and I'm trying to find a connection with ETs, why would they need a craft? Why would they need a spacecraft or whatever those objects are, and when they can pass through dimensionally without it?
It could be different ETs at different levels of advancement.
Okay. So then the ones who are able to pass through dimensionally without a craft, do you think that they're more advanced than the ones who are operating these craft?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, so let me answer that a different way. There's a lot of theories of what kind of aliens are out there. There's the humanoids, the
Right.
Nordics, or there's the reptilians. There's like the blue beings. Then there's like they're either reported as solid, or they're reported as like more of an energy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all of these different beings that are being seen. There's the insectoid. There's the little grays, the tall grays.
Right.
There's a whole variety of alien species, and maybe there's just a whole variety of ways that they travel, and that might not even be the answer. I'm not saying that those beings are extraterrestrial. I'm not arguing for that. What I'm saying is that science is putting out all these theories that a lot of people don't understand. And in order for them to understand that, they go to what they know: cryptos and zoology and
Right.
ghosts and all that weird stuff that's in the paranormal field. But I mean, there's no reason to say that maybe aliens are at different levels of civilization. I mean, from my understanding of physics, it takes a tremendous amount of energy to open a wormhole or
Yeah.
create a wormhole. We don't have that. We don't even have the energy to bend space for like a rudimentary warp drive.
Right.
So you would think that if a civilization is traveling through a vortex, and in the Skinwalker Ranch book, remember the original ranch guy and family, it was a guy who was the ranch hand who owned it, and his wife and kids, they saw the portal open, they saw the craft come out. So maybe it's just that the craft generates the power to open the field.
Right.
Maybe the beings maybe there's so much radiation or electromagnetic interference that the craft protects the beings. So
Sure.
they use a craft because they don't want to die.
Right.
Who knows? But that could be an explanation of why you see these things open, and then there's crafts, because there have bodies that are still susceptible to being destroyed by the forces of nature.
Right. So I have some interesting stats, Mike. I wanted to share it with you. One of them involves the Bigfoot phenomenon. A lot of people believe that there's a correlation between Bigfoot sightings and UFO activity. I have some stats there on the screen, and I highlighted Maryland in red because that's where I am. 34. Look at the numbers for Florida, California, New York, and Pennsylvania. Those are pretty high numbers, especially California and Florida. But as you well know, the UFO statistics are very high for those states as well. Now,
Right.
is there a correlation here? Not a one for one, but is it just a function of the population and the size of those states that's giving us those larger numbers for the Bigfoot sightings?
I think you have to think of the mythology too, because I know in Florida they have like their version of a swamp Bigfoot, and that's Bigfoot swamp. He's like I forget his name, but whatever you want to call it,
Yeah,
is hair, a lot has not as thick hair as the northern Bigfoot. They're more they look a little different.
yeah,
So like Northern California has a lot of forest. Um, so Washington has a tremendous amount of
yeah.
forested land. So the mythology of Bigfoot in these areas are much stronger. So that could be it. New York, upstate New York, has the the Catskills. Yeah, Catskills.
Sure.
Uh, so maybe that's why the mythology is much stronger in those cities.
Here's a related slide on Bigfoots. My question, and I want my investigators here in Maryland to think about this. There are 15 million hunters in the United States in 2020 alone. And 15.2 million of them have licenses. Now, there's a little bit of it, 200,000 are not hunting, but that's beside the point. So my question is, all those millions of people are out hunting every fall, every spring. Why have there been no Bigfoot bodies found? Not just Bigfoot, the so-called dog man, chupacabras, you name it. A few tracks here and there have been found, some recordings of weird noises in the forest.
Yeah.
But by and large, it's all anecdotal. And there's a lot of people who are trying to tie UFOs and Bigfoot. And
Yes.
it's a nice story. It's interesting. There are some very good podcasts to talk about this. They're really enjoyable to hear. I don't think we can take that as hard science. In fact, I really don't see how we can.
I agree with you. 15 million people in the woods, you would think one of them would see them. And as you said off camera, that doesn't include the hikers, the fishermen.
Yeah, the campers, all of that. How many more million of people are out there?
Even people flying their little Cessnas and small planes over the area. There's nothing. Yeah, that's a good question. And maybe that alone should tell you something about it.
Now, some people may say, Mike, wow, these Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yetis, they could be multidimensional, and they're being brought here by the UFOs. Well, I don't see the evidence.
I mean, I've heard that story before. I've heard the stories of people following the Bigfoot tracks, and all of a sudden they just stop, like the creature go through a portal or something. Right. But my argument is if you have so many people looking for them for how many years, the odds are astronomical that you would at least get something.
Right.
And they're not getting anything.
And what we have are a few plaster footprints and some very grainy videos.
Right.
Of them.
And they're always grainy.
Yeah.
With that. With all the modern technology we have, even an iPhone has a great camera. It can take a picture or a video, and everyone has some kind of smartphone with them, whether it's an Android or an iPhone or a Google or whatever the other phones are that are out there. They all can take good quality photos and videos, and there's nothing. I don't know. I think to me that says a lot.
Statistically, it's hard to it's hard to come to grips with Bigfoot and the UFO connection,
Yeah.
you know. And I
I
have
think,
family members in Western Pennsylvania who are avid outdoorsmen. They live to hunt, to fish. And I've asked them, have you ever seen or heard anything unusual when they're out in the woods? Not one of them has. That's just, my own family. But in
and they would
Western,
have no reason to keep it from you. I mean, maybe an
right? No,
outsider, they'll
these
say,
aren't
"Ah, I
people
don't
who
want
would
to tell an
embellish or
outsider."
lie. They would tell me if they did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because,
Western
an
Pennsylvania is a hotbed for this so-called activity.
yeah, no, it is. It has a very high amount of people. And Connecticut, we don't have, I think we had 4 sightings of a Bigfoot, according to one of the more popular Bigfoot tracking websites.
Yeah.
We don't have that. Although we are along the Appalachian Trails,
Mhm.
somewhere along the New York, Connecticut border, and they do say Bigfoot is up and down there. But again, like you were saying, a lot of people hike the Appalachian Trail every year,
Sure.
and there are no reports of them, hiking with a Bigfoot next to them.
So is it possible that these creatures exist? There's probably something we don't know for sure yet, but is there a tie to UFOs from another galaxy? I'm not willing to go down that path and say, yeah, there is. The evidence just isn't there.
And this would be a good time to put into our listeners. If we talked a lot tonight about some very controversial topics that people have very strong opinions for
They
and
do.
against.
They sure do.
So if you want to share, email us. Our email is on our YouTube page, or post a comment and share it on our page.
How are we doing on time, Mike, for our show?
We are coming up to we just hit 45 minutes.
Okay.
So we should probably start wrapping it up in a little bit. We don't want to go too long. People get bored. So let's keep moving on if you want.
Here's one statistic I wanted to share here, and that is Americans' views on UFOs in general. If you look back at 2019, about roughly 1/3 of Americans believed in an alien presence in UFOs, spacecraft. And then look at the jump in that number from 33% up to 41. That's a pretty good number, 8%.
Yeah.
Now, is that because people have been seeing things, or because of that report that the federal government published last year? What was it, June, I believe it came out? And it was. Yeah. There was an immediate jump of 8% in public.
Well, don't forget too that those videos that were released back with the New York Times article, they became very big in the news leading up to that report. They had a lot of experts on television and the media. I think it did. I know personally, like a lot of my friends who were more skeptic at the time are taking it more seriously now that the government is involved. I guess so I think so. It will be interesting to see what's going to happen if they run this poll again next year, because now you've had the congressional hearing, and they are starting their task force. Just recently, NASA announced that they are going to be looking into UFOs as well. So you have 2 agencies on the government looking into UFOs. So I would suspect that this number will go up.
Yeah, it probably will, as it as the media picks up on it, people
Mhm.
will know more, and the data will definitely change. But I have to
And
point out, as you just indicated, these task force, these new studies, NASA being involved, not one of them mentioned the paranormal. It was
correct.
laser focused on UAPs, UFOs, and
And
rightly so.
hopefully this translates into the ufology as a field that we as we in the royal we move away from the paranormal and focus a little more on the science as well.
I think it's a credibility issue. If the UFO investigation organizations want to be taken seriously, they're going to have to be real careful about melding UFOs and some of those other paranormal subjects that we've talked about,
I agree.
especially if the civilian organizations like MUFON and the others want to work with the federal government, with DOD.
Hmm.
They're going to have to tread lightly on the paranormal.
Yeah, I agree. You're absolutely right on that. They're going to have to figure out what the priorities were, and that might also come down to, as before, follow the money. If you want to get a government grant to
Yeah,
look at, or a NASA grant to look in UFOs, you're going to have to follow the grant proposal, and I seriously doubt it's going to say paranormal. It's going to be
exactly. It won't include
science-based.
the matrix theory, and it won't include Mothman or the others.
Right. So maybe the money is what will also influence it. That's exciting times for ufology. We're going through a rebirth in IR and the identity of the field. Um, and we'll see where it takes us if we become more respected and less ridiculed and put to the fringes. Maybe we
And
will no longer.
that's another danger of delving too deeply into the paranormal, is to be considered still a fringe topic, and it really
Mhm.
isn't. UFO, a study of UFOs is no longer a fringe topic.
That's right. So it's kind of like either get with the modern times or get with the changing times, or you're going to be left behind.
Okay, Mike, what's up for our next show? What are we going to be talking about?
Well, our next show is going to be on Antarctica and the Nazi connection. For those of you that heard our second podcast, we were talking about the secret space program. So this is kind of looking at the Antarctica connection and the involvement with the Nazis and their research in Antarctica. So I think it's going to be an interesting topic, and I hope you all listen and join us. And thank you for listening to tonight's show. Dan and I enjoyed putting it together for you, and we really would appreciate if you will hit subscribe to our YouTube page, and feel free to leave us comments and or email us. We would love to hear your feedback on potential show topics or your thoughts on this show or any of the shows that we've done prior to this.
Well stated, Mike. I couldn't have stated it any better myself. Thank you.
So good night, everyone, and thank you for joining us again. And we'll see you again next month when we put out the next podcast.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.